If I asked you guys to give me the equation for photosynthesis, I would guess a bunch of you could. Is anyone thinking back, 7th grade? What is the chemical equation, Dan, for photosynthesis?
ATP.
Now it's Alex? No. David.
H2O plus CO2 with light energy equals oxygen.
Good. So yes. So back in 7th grade, what we talked about was carbon dioxide plus water produces glucose and oxygen. That's sort of the simplified version. No, the ATP comes in cellular respiration. I mean, ATP is going to come into play here, but it's not in that simplified equation. So we could look at that equation and CO2, how does one carbon dioxide make glucose? How many carbons are in carbon dioxide? How about glucose? 6. So it doesn't, how do you go from 1 carbon to 6? So they don't, because light doesn't have carbon dioxide. It's not matter, it's just energy. So that equation is not really an accurate equation. This is a more, we call a balanced equation. It should make sense though. If you look at this now, adding in those coefficients, 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water molecules produce a glucose molecule and 6 oxygens. So now, does the carbon from glucose have enough carbon coming in as carbon dioxide? 6 carbons in glucose. How many do you have coming in? 6. Okay, so this is a balanced equation, which when you take chemistry probably next year, you'll learn about balancing equations and things like that. So, but that's still a simplified formula. It still is just giving us the overview. And it's correct. This is the inputs of photosynthesis and the correct outputs of photosynthesis. But there's a bunch of stuff that happens sort of in that arrow that we're going to start to get into the detail of in this class. So those are the materials required, but there's also some other things that are required, light energy, as we said, enzymes to allow this to happen, chlorophyll, some other things. But we don't include those things in that generalized equation because they're not sort of reactants and products in this overall view. All right, so water plus carbon dioxide produces glucose and oxygen using light. So we're looking today at these steps in here, which we never learned about before. So really, the process of photosynthesis is broken down into 2 stages. They're called different things, sometimes called the light and dark reactions, sometimes called the light-dependent reactions and light-independent reactions, sometimes called the light reactions in the Kelvin cycle. They're just a bunch of different terms. So we're going to talk about each of them in turn. Start with the light-dependent part of photosynthesis. So obviously, if it's light-dependent, it requires light to happen. Okay? So it requires light. This process happens in the grana, in the thylakoids, in those little discs that are in the chloroplast. This process happens within that membrane and on the inside. For the light-dependent reactions, it requires obviously light and water. So we see light and water coming into these light reactions. And it produces, this is where the oxygen comes from. So the oxygen photosynthesis comes from the light reaction. But it also produces a couple other things that we don't see in this equation. It produces ATP, which we know is a way that cells do what? What is the function of ATP? Well, it can be used for that. In general, ATP is a source of energy for cells. So the light reactions produce some ATP. They also produce this other molecule, NADPH. It's another energy carrier, a molecule that can carry energy. All right. Then there's another part of these reactions, the light-independent reactions, the Kelvin cycle, sometimes called the dark reaction. Okay? So they don't require light, the dark reaction. This part happens in the stroma. So that fluid that's around the grana, that fills up the chloroplast, the light-independent reactions are taking place there. They require ATP, NADPH, and they require carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide, where does the ATP and NADPH come from? In the light reaction. And they produce sugars. This is where the sugars that are produced in photosynthesis come from. So we'll look at the details of those. So here's just another view. Same sort of thing. So this is happening in the chloroplast. We have light coming in. The light reactions are here. Water is taken in. Oxygen is released. Okay. NADPH is produced and shuttled over here to the stroma for the Kelvin cycle, for the light-independent reactions. The Kelvin cycle takes in carbon dioxide, uses that ATP and NADPH, and produces the sugars. Again, we have the equation here. We have light plus water, okay, plus carbon dioxide, produces oxygen. So when we talk about photosynthesis and respiration, an important part of those is this concept in chemistry of oxidation-reduction reactions. You'll learn a lot about this next year. ReDox reaction. And we're not going to really get into details, but you might see these words as we move through this next section. You'll certainly see them next year. So oxidation reduction just have to do with the movement of energy and electrons from one molecule to another. So when a molecule loses electrons, gives up those electrons to another molecule, okay, what we say is that has been oxidized. When a molecule gains an electron, okay, from another molecule, we say it's been reduced. And so these two processes, they have to happen together, right? One thing is gaining electron. It must have gotten that electron from something else, which is lost an electron. So oxidation reduction, they always go together. So this orange molecule, for example, okay, it's losing this electron, but this green molecule is gaining an electron. The orange molecule has been oxidized. The green molecule has been reduced. We can also understand this as hydrogen, because hydrogen often is bringing electrons with it. So if one molecule gains hydrogen, or loses hydrogen, we can think of the same thing. It's been oxidized or reduced. The way to remember this, there's a couple ways teachers help students run this. Remember, oil rigs, oxidation is a loss of electrons. Reduction is a gain of electrons, oil rig. Or Leo, the lion goes grr. I think that's how my chemistry teacher taught it. Leo, losing electrons, oxidized, grr, gain electrons. But we don't really need to know much about these details. You'll learn a lot about this next year, like I said. So these light-dependent reactions, they use light to produce two things that are going to be used in the next step. They produce ATP and NADPH, energy carriers. And so this happens in those grana and those stacks, those thylakoids. And what happens is, I'm just going to go back and forth here a little bit. Embedded in the membrane. So here we have, you see the phospholipid bilayer. This is a membrane of the thylakoid. Sort of embedded in that membrane are a bunch of proteins that allow the light-dependent reactions to take place. And they're called photosystem 2, photosystem 1, and there's other molecules as well. So light comes in, goes through the chloroplast, hits the thylakoid membrane. Okay? What happens is the energy from light excites an electron. That energy gets passed to an electron, okay, which bumps it up in its energy level. And when that happens, that electron is replaced, the one that's going to be passed down here, gets replaced by an electron from water. And water gets split. H2O gets split into oxygen, and that's where the oxygen comes from, and hydrogen ions. So a photon of light excites an electron, splits water, and then that excited electron gets passed down. Now that it has this newfound energy, because it was struck with light, the electron gets passed from one molecule to another to another. And as it's getting passed from one molecule to another, the energy can be used to do stuff. And what that energy is used for, it's to pump excess hydrogen into the interior of the thylakoid. So you see there's more hydrogen coming on. It's building up a high concentration of hydrogen inside of the thylakoid. Because what's going to happen to this hydrogen that's building up here, it's going to be allowed out, but because there's a high concentration inside, a low concentration outside, as it goes through this specialized protein, it can be used to do something. What's the name of this protein? ATP synthase. What do you think it does? Yeah, it synthesizes ATP. It makes ATP. So as the hydrogen is moving through this, it's powering this enzyme to make ATP. We're going to see ATP synthase in respiration as well. Yeah. So that electron gets passed down from molecule to molecule. Goes here, the electron's excited, goes molecule to molecule, all the way down to here. Then there's another set of pigments in this photosystem 1. Again, light energy strikes it, bumps the electron up in its energy level again. That energy is used to take NADP, and transform it into NADPH. Okay, so now we see all the things that have been produced in the light-dependent reactions are here. We had light coming in, we had water coming in. We've produced oxygen, we've produced NADPH, and we've produced ATP. So we have all of those parts of the light reactions, we have all those things produced. Those are the byproducts. Oxygen is a byproduct, so the oxygen is just released. Okay, the ATP is going to be used, the NADPH is going to be used in the next step. So the next step is the light-independent reactions, also known as dark reactions or the Calvin cycle, carbon fixation. But they actually, it's calling these like the dark reactions is kind of incorrect because they don't actually happen in the dark. If we look back at this diagram here, why does this stop? So this does not require light. The Calvin cycle doesn't require light. So why does it stop if there's no light available? What others are? Amy. Yeah, so the Calvin cycle needs the products from the light reactions, from the light-dependent reaction. It needs the ATP, it needs the NADPH. So if light isn't present, this stops, which stops the production of ATP and NADPH, which stops the Calvin cycle. So they both, one actually requires the light, but the other one requires those products. So that's why it's not happening. This is happening in the stroma. So this is happening in that fluid that fills the chloroplast. And what's happening in the Calvin cycle is those high energy molecules, NADPH, ATP, the energy from them is used to take carbon dioxide and reduce it to 3-carbon sugar, which can be transformed into glucose. So that carbon is fixed. It's sort of taken and turned into a form that's storing more energy. And the result is one molecule of something called G3P, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. It's going to be turned into glucose eventually, or maybe another carbohydrate. So here is the process. Don't worry, you don't need to know all the details. And sometimes in college, I don't know if they still do, they make the students like memorize all these in-between compounds, and there's enzymes which allow all of these stuff. Super complicated. 1,3-biphosphoglycerate. But of course, if you have that test in college, you like just memorize it all, and then you instantly forget it like 5 minutes after the test. So I don't know that they actually make it. But anyway, what we need to know is just sort of the overview. So we have coming in carbon dioxide up here with this one. We have the things that we just talked about, ATP and NADPH, are being used up to transform this carbon dioxide into a form that's actually usable to carbohydrates that the organism can use for energy. So don't worry about the internal process, but I'll just give you the idea, is that carbon dioxide comes in, absorbed into the stroma, and it is combined by this enzyme called ribisco. It takes a molecule called ribulose biphosphate, RuBP, attaches the carbon dioxide, what's that? RuBP, ribulose, that's just what it's called, as a short conversion. So it attaches the carbon dioxide to this RuBP, and then it gets transformed. It's being reduced step by step, using energy from ATP, using energy from NADPH, to produce this compound called G3P. That's what the ultimate goal is. This G3P can be used to make glucose. But then also it needs to reform this ribulose biphosphate so that the cycle can repeat. And this actually, the whole cycle happens 3 times to make one G3P. Okay, so 3 carbon dioxide have to come in. This process goes 3 times to produce 1. And G3P is a sort of generic carbohydrate, a generic 3-carbon sugar. It can be transformed into many different things. Most of it would be transformed into glucose. But it could be used to make proteins and lipids. Some can be used to form cellulose or sucrose. It just depends on what the organism requires. So when we say in photosynthesis, chloroplast produces glucose, technically it really produces G3P. That can be turned into glucose. But we sort of. Right, so again, just looking at this overview, light-dependent, light-independent. The products of the light-dependent reaction, power, and allowed for carbon dioxide to be transformed into carbohydrates. And what about these things? Where do you think these molecules come from? What happens to ATP after the energy's been used? Yeah, it turns into ADP. And what happens to NADPH once the energy is used? NADP. So you can imagine these molecules as sort of batteries. The batteries are charged in the light-dependent reactions, and then the energy is used in the Calvin cycle. And then the batteries are sent back to the light reactions to be recharged, and that process repeats over and over again. So what affects the rate of photosynthesis? Obviously, yeah, the amount of light is an important factor. What else would be a factor? What's that? Temperature and carbon dioxide. These are three factors that are really important that determine the rate of photosynthesis. So if we imagine light intensity, if there's no light present, how much photosynthesis is going to happen? None. As the intensity of the light increases, photosynthesis increases, but it gets to a certain point, and any additional light doesn't actually speed it up anymore. It's almost saturated. That all of those photosystems have the maximum amount of light. They can't really work any faster. So eventually, photosynthesis levels off. Same thing with carbon dioxide. Okay? As carbon dioxide levels go from 0 and get higher, the rate of photosynthesis increases until it's saturated, until excess carbohydrates can't be handled by the Calvin cycle. So it's maxed out and the photosynthesis is happening as quickly as it can. Now temperature is a little bit different. So very cold temperatures, we know chemical reactions slow down. As the temperature increases, the chemical reactions can speed up. But then what happens? Yeah, can you connect this to something else we learned about earlier in this year? Have we seen any other graphs that look similar to this, Jackie? Enzymes. And it's the enzymes are why this graph looks this way, right? Photosynthesis requires many enzymes to allow all of these reactions to take place. And we know that enzymes work at an optimum temperature. If the temperature goes beyond that optimum temperature, they don't work as well. Eventually, they can stop working altogether if those enzymes become denatured. So the graph of temperature looks slightly different. Any questions about the details of photosynthesis? So we're going to reinforce this over the next few activities that we do. But for now, we'll stop with our notes.